A lone torch flickered in the middle of the moonlit desert. The figure holding it, a tall woman named Layla, stood on a small, rocky outcrop scanning the endless dunes. She'd come here, guided by a centuries-old scroll discovered in the archives of the Coptic monastery of St. Catherine. The parchment hinted at a lost oasis deep in the desert, rumored to hide the tomb of a forgotten priestess. Long silver trails of moonlight glimmered on the sandy plains, and the hush of the desert night settled around her. In the distant sky, winking stars formed a canopy overhead, reflecting ancient mysteries that Layla had devoted her life to unraveling. She inhaled the cool, dry air, recalling the cryptic lines she'd translated. Only she who bore the favor of the goddess may unseal the desert's hidden heart. Yet no map had ever affirmed the oasis's existence, nor mentioned what forbidden rituals might lie waiting there. Determination had brought Layla this far. With the last of her savings, she had commissioned 2 local guides, brothers named Rafi and Omar, who knew the desert's secrets better than any compass. They had trekked for days under a relentless sun, passing bleached bones of dead camels and abandoned nomadic camps, always listening for the wind that carried echoes of old tales. Finally, the desert itself seemed to whisper a promise of revelation. Strange rock formations and subtle changes in the color of the sand led them to this vantage point. They had grown uneasy at sunset, when their shadows stretched to improbable lengths, as though the desert was trying to enfold them. Rafi, muttering about old curses, had urged them to turn back, but Layla insisted they press on, guided by an intuition she couldn't quite name. Now, with only the moon and her torch, she stood guard as the brothers prepared a small makeshift camp below. She closed her eyes to recall the inscriptions from the scroll once more. They told of a priestess devoted to Hathor, the Egyptian goddess associated with love, music, and fertility, but also with secrets whispered in the desert wind. The text suggested that this priestess, buried alive due to palace intrigue, had sworn an oath to complete a ceremony that even death could not annul. If the rite were left undone, the land itself would suffer in hidden ways, so the legend warned. But Layla found it impossible to imagine what ancient power might still linger. She thought she was simply chasing a myth, hoping to uncover an undiscovered tomb that would make her academic reputation. Yet something deeper now stirred inside her, as though the desert were calling her name in a voice only her heart could hear. The next morning, the sun rose in a piercing blaze. A wave of heat pressed down on their camp, forcing them to move early. Rafi and Omar muttered about the rock face they'd scouted the previous afternoon. They claimed it felt peculiarly hollow. Layla, sipping water and shielding her eyes from the brightness, insisted they investigate. Their camels grumbled in the hot wind, taking reluctant steps across shifting dunes until they reached a sandstone cliff etched with faint hieroglyphs. The language was unmistakably ancient Egyptian, not the standard formulaic inscriptions found in typical burial sites, but slanted symbols that seemed older, more primal. The presence of scorpion motifs repeated throughout, and Layla noticed dueling serpents entwined around what looked like an ankh. Sweat trickled down her neck as she carefully ran her fingers across the faint chiseling. Her breath snagged when she realized that these symbols resembled the lines in her scroll. Each swirl appeared to match perfectly with the text's puzzling references to the mouth of the desert and the Black Gate. Even the shape of the rock face, a tall, rectangular recess, seemed like an entrance sealed by centuries of sand and scorching sun. She could sense a presence, as though something on the other side of this stone threshold gazed through the barrier. Omar hammered at an exposed seam in the rock with a sturdy iron spike, and under each blow the surface groaned. A fine dust fell away before a large slab cracked open, revealing a dark passage inside. A chill breeze drifted out, incongruous in the desert heat, stirring the hairs on Layla's arms. Had they truly found it, the fabled resting place of a priestess lost to time? They lit lanterns and carefully stepped into the dark corridor. The walls were lined with faded paintings, scenes of a solemn woman in flowing robes, arms upraised in obeisance before a regal cow-headed god. An energy clung to the air, electrified, as though ancient words vibrated just beneath the threshold of hearing. Their flickering lamplight revealed inscriptions detailing offerings of milk and honey, stylized images of palm fronds, and eyes framed by serpent headdresses. The deeper they ventured, the colder it seemed to grow. Finally, they reached a wide space that appeared to be a burial chamber. At its center lay a sarcophagus carved out of dark granite. Hieroglyphs ran along every edge, and the lid bore the depiction of a serene woman with arms crossed, her face wearing a mysterious smile that looked almost steeped in longing. Nerves taut, Layla instructed Rafi and Omar to help her push off the heavy lid. Their combined efforts made the granite slab shift with a grinding rasp. Dust swirling into the corridor. She half expected a cloud of ancient curses to rise, but only stale air escaped, carrying a faint mixture of frankincense and myrrh. Within the sarcophagus, the mummy of a woman lay wrapped in fine linen that had weathered thousands of years. A golden pectoral plate rested on her chest, ornately carved with symbols of Hathor, the Eye of Ra, and a sistrum. In the gloom of the lamplight, Layla felt drawn to the glint of the artifact. She hesitated, recalling the warnings about disturbing the rest of the dead. Yet her curiosity was unstoppable. Gently lifting the plate, she sensed a pulse, very faint, as if her own heartbeat reverberated off the metal. At that moment, a shimmer seemed to pass over the mummy's eyelids. Rafi's gasp echoed in the stillness. The linen wrappings emitted a crackling sound like dry leaves. The mummy's chest seemed to rise, and an exhalation of ancient air whispered through the tomb. Layla's hand shot to her mouth as she realized the figure was staring. All at once, centuries of dust cascaded off the wrappings. The linen loosened around the face, revealing flesh that was shockingly intact. When the priestess's eyes fluttered open, they glinted amber in the lamplight, a golden reflection of times lost. A hush fell over them all, broken only by Omar's trembling breath. Layla instinctively knelt, her heart pounding in awe mingled with terror. The priestess slowly sat up, and the movement of her shoulders cast small motes of dust into the stifling air. She looked from Layla to the brothers, and then at the pectoral plate in Layla's hands. With a voice that sounded like a distant wind, she spoke in ancient Egyptian. Layla's knowledge of the language was incomplete, but she understood enough to decipher a demand. "Where is the oasis?" The priestess's name, gleaned from repeated references in the scroll, was Neferet. Her wide eyes radiated an urgency that Layla sensed was centuries overdue. Gingerly, Layla laid the golden plate on Neferet's lap and managed to respond in a mix of broken Egyptian phrases, uncertain if the meaning truly reached the priestess. A surge of energy ignited the torches around the chamber, as though Neferet's presence alone fed them. She seemed too real, too vibrant to be confined to the tomb any longer. Staggering slightly, Neferet rose from her granite cradle. Omar flinched, crossing himself, while Rafi clung to the lantern. Layla's heart hammered, yet some intuition insisted that this moment was neither malevolent nor accidental. Neferet's slender hands brushed dust from her robes. Her gaze, though intense, was not unkind. With slow, measured steps, she walked to an adjoining passage and beckoned for them to follow. Unsure whether to comply, they followed at a distance, drawn by a sense of inevitability. The corridor led deeper beneath the sandstone, revealing a second chamber with inscriptions that depicted watering holes brimming with date palms. More references to a sacred oasis claimed to exist in a remote region, a place dedicated to the goddess Hathor. Layla recognized the repeated phrase referential to the desert's beating heart, which the scroll had also mentioned. Neferet paused by these murals, placed her hand upon them and closed her eyes. Seeing her silent devotion, Layla realized that the priestess had awakened to fulfill the ceremony left undone by her entombment. They emerged from the suffocating corridors into glaring daylight. The next hours passed in a blur as Neferet insisted through gestures, glances, and some few decipherable words that they must travel farther into the desert. The guides balked at first, but a hush fell when Neferet spoke a name in a tone of reverence. Hathor. An ancient echo reverberated through the wind, as though even the sun-baked dunes recognized the goddess's call. Despite their own misgivings, Raffi and Omar prepared the camels for further travel. They dared not refuse a living embodiment of Egypt's ancient lineage, no matter how impossible her existence seemed. So their caravan set forth, guided by the newly awakened priestess. Layla rode close to Neferet, watching her expression shift from sorrow to resolve. A curious synergy seemed to flow between them, as though each breath Layla took was matched by the centuries of longing in Neferet's gaze. As the sun reached its zenith, they passed winding stretches of desert littered with broken pantheon carvings, fragments of old statues, a toppled column half buried in the sand. Each ruin told a silent story of decline. The group eventually arrived at an outcropping of jagged rocks forming a natural gateway. The wind wailed through the crevices in mourning tones. Beyond that lay a dip in the terrain, shielded by dunes precisely where local legends rumored a hidden oasis might lie. Their camels plodded down the slope, stirring the dunes with each labored step. Layla pressed a hand to her chest, excitement building. Then, impossibly, glimpses of green appeared amid the drab dust. The listening hush returned, and all at once they saw it. A cluster of palm trees and a thin ribbon of shimmering water nestled in a depression of the desert's vast sea of sand. Small though it was, the oasis looked like paradise after endless dunes. Pale pink lotus flowers floated on the water's surface, unusual for a desert pond. The air smelled vaguely sweet, carrying a hint of frankincense. Neferet dismounted, her bare feet pressing into the soft sand as she approached the water's edge. A swarm of dragonflies buzzed overhead, flitting between the palm fronds. Layla and the brothers, still in awe, watched as the priestess raised her arms in a motion reminiscent of the hieroglyphic murals. Her voice rang out in a phrase that carried timeless power. A ripple passed across the water, and for a moment, the entire oasis seemed lit from within. Signing for Layla to come forward, Neferet offered her the pectoral plate. The designs it bore, the eye, the sistrum, and the shape of a stylized face looked more vibrant under the midday sun, as though newly gilded. With trembling hands, Layla took the artifact. Slowly, she repeated a phrase in halting ancient Egyptian that she had gleaned from the scroll. She prayed she was honoring the correct goddess, that her tongue wouldn't deliver an unintended curse. Neferet nodded. Then she pointed to the water's edge, where intricate stone carvings rose just beneath the surface, hidden by water plants. It was a small platform, large enough for one person to stand on and face the glimmering reflection of the sun. Neferet spoke, and Layla understood that they were to perform the final portion of the ceremony. The moment felt solemn. Layla hesitated, feeling entirely unworthy of standing in the place of a centuries-old priestess. But Neferet's gaze held neither impatience nor condemnation. She exuded a gentle insistence that the ceremony had waited far too long already. Setting her fears aside, Layla stepped onto the stone platform, the pectoral plate pressed against her chest. She shut her eyes, breathed in the desert air, and recited the words etched in her memory from the scroll. Awaken in the place where Hathor's eye meets the water, where the desert's heart unfolds before those who bear truth. May her blessings flow and the land be renewed. An otherworldly sensation coursed through her arms and legs, and for an instant time seemed suspended. The water glowed bright enough to rival the sun. The palm fronds swayed in a breeze that carried the sweet fragrance of lilies and honey. Beneath her feet, the ancient carvings radiated warmth, as though some hidden power pulsed up from the earth itself. Her senses flickered with images, a grand temple thrumming with music, dancers swirling in devotion, offerings of lotus and pomegranates laid at Hathor's feet. Suddenly, Neferet stepped onto the platform, Placing her hands over Lila's, with a calm, ancient resonance she spoke a final invocation. A golden shimmer roiled across the water's surface, coalescing into the faint outline of a cow-headed figure wearing a solar disk Hathor's blessed visage. Lila felt the presence tangibly, an overwhelming benevolence that pressed tears from her eyes. Then, just as swiftly, the vision dissolved into soft ripples. The ceremony was complete. For the first time, Layla realized how the desert had grown silent, as if in anticipation of a verdict. A hush stretched for several long seconds before a gentle breeze again stirred the palms with whispered approval. Neferet's eyes shone with gratitude. She turned to Layla and murmured a blessing in Egyptian that Layla could only partly understand. "You have honored her presence. May you walk in her light." The priestess took a step backward and cast her gaze around. It was as though she had done what she came to do, and her spirit at last found peace. A gentle smile curved her lips, relief that centuries of restless waiting had finally ended. Then, a faint golden aura enveloped her. Her form wavered, dust shedding from the edges of her robes. In a gradual, dignified withdrawal, she sank to her knees, bowed her head, and disintegrated into bright motes that floated away on the desert breeze. The linen wrappings left behind disintegrated into fine sand that slipped through the cracks in the platform. Only the pectoral plate remained in Layla's fingers. A final echo of her voice lingered in Layla's mind, a sense of deep, abiding gratitude. Rafi and Omar ran forward, shocked, yet touched by what they'd just witnessed. Their faces reflected awe more than fear, as though they too felt the intangible grace of completing an ancient vow. The water in the oasis shimmered more brilliantly than before, as if stirred to new vitality. Birds fluttered overhead, drawn to a land once rumored barren. In the distance, the desert dunes seemed less threatening, their shifting patterns carrying a promise of rebirth. Lila noticed that the sensation of scorching heat had eased, replaced by a gentle warmth that carried a hint of hope and renewal. When they all knelt at the water's edge to drink, the water tasted incredibly pure, cooler and sweeter than any found in modern wells. Layla offered a silent prayer of thanks. She thought of the stories that might arise from this place, and how she would share the experience once she returned to civilization. Yet a soft intuition advised her to keep certain details sacred. Some encounters were not meant for casual display. The hush of the ceremony lingered as they filled their canteens and looked to the horizon. The thunder of desert winds seemed gentler than before, as though the land itself was content for the moment. With calm deliberation, Lailal tucked the pectoral plate into her satchel. Future archaeologists would debate its origins, but she intended to ensure it found a home in a safe repository, protected from treasure hunters and black market dealers. She ascended the dune crest to catch one last glimpse of the oasis. Even from that vantage point, the water's shimmer stood out like a silver coin flickering in the sand. Despite the ephemeral quality of desert landscapes, Layla sensed that this oasis would endure. Perhaps not forever, but long enough for others worthy of Hathor's blessing to discover it. The return journey felt different, as if guided by a benevolent presence. Rafi and Omar found more direct routes by following subtle changes in the dunes. Illusory obstacles that had loomed large on their outbound trek now melted away. When they made camp for the night, Layla's dreams were lit with dancing torches and joyous chanting that echoed the earlier ceremony. She saw Neferet smiling, no longer consumed by sorrow or longing, and awakened with tears on her cheek. Gazing skyward at the brilliant stars, she felt a sense of unity with ancient and modern times alike. The desert, infamous for imprisonment by scorching days and freezing nights, had also proven to be a keeper of wonders unbound by the centuries. Days passed, and they reached a small settlement near the edges of the major trade routes. Here, word of their expedition had spread. fueling rumors of lost treasures. Some doubted they had even ventured so deep into the desert, assuming they had turned back or discovered nothing. Layla, Rafi, and Omar exchanged knowing smiles, unwilling to tarnish the memory of their encounter with the cynicism of skeptics. While they rested in a modest guest house, Layla carefully documented everything she had witnessed, sketching the inscriptions and writing down her translations in a plain leather journal. She lingered over describing the moment Neferet dissolved into golden motes, uncertain how to put that transcendent sight into mere words. Night after night, the memory of the oasis glowed in the back of her mind. She wrestled with how to honor Neferet's legacy and the goddess, Hathor's blessing. In her studies, Layla had learned that some stories must remain partially masked, so their true essence remains intact, undisrupted by dogmatic inquiry or greedy exploitation. She decided to record just enough for posterity, enough clues that a worthy soul might one day find the hidden oasis, if driven by pure intention. Yet she left out the precise directions and the final incantations, ensuring the place remained cloaked in its ancient hush. On the morning she prepared to depart for Cairo, Layla took out the golden pectoral. In the early sunlight, the artifact felt warm to the touch. She held it up, and it caught the glow of dawn, radiating gentle rays across the small courtyard of the guest house. In its reflection, she imagined the unwavering gaze of Neferet, the unwavering commitment that priestess had held for centuries. Abruptly, Lael understood something more. The immortality the ceremony had offered wasn't about living forever, but about the enduring power of devotion. A vow, made in love and reverence, transcends the boundaries of life and death alike. With renewed resolve, she wrapped the plate in soft cloth and tucked it away in her travel case. Once she secured the funds, she would seek out ethical experts, curators with integrity, religious scholars who respected the old gods. She would piece together a narrative of the priestess's life, aligning textual evidence with the whispers of folklore, forging a coherent story that honored the echoes the desert had preserved. And though she would never reveal the complete truth, that a priestess had awakened in her presence, she suspected that a part of Neferet's spirit would live on in her own work, quietly guiding each decision she made. In time, Layla, Rafi, and Omar bid farewell, exchanging promises to meet again once the secrets of the lost tomb were properly cared for. Setting out across the eastern roads, they watched the sunrise spread its golden mantle over the horizon. The day brought a hint of a breeze that carried the faint scent of blooming desert flowers, reminding them that life can spring forth in even the harshest landscapes. For Layla, each step forward felt like a testament to faith in the unknown. She had ventured into the desert in pursuit of academic discovery and found instead a living myth that asked for her aid in finishing an unfinished rite. The experience left her with more than wonder. It provided a sense of belonging to a cosmic tapestry spanning eras and lifetimes. She thought of Neferet once more, imagining the priestess's spirit at peace in the presence of the goddess she served. Perhaps the desert would remain haunted by the memory of that night's awakening, retold in the hush of twilight breezes that brushed across ancient sand. Perhaps future wanderers, hearing an uncanny whisper in the wind, would follow the call without ever fully knowing where it led. With each footstep lifting small clouds of dust, Layla felt certain the desert guarded ancient truths beyond the reach of time. It was well past noon when she and her companions stopped to rest in a patch of shade. As she drank from her water skin, which still contained some of the oasis water, she sensed a serene energy lingering in its taste. The faint echoes of chanting reverberated in the corners of her memory, never fading entirely. The vow of the priestess had been fulfilled, but the magic it unleashed disputed the logic of finality. Seen through such a lens, life itself might be an endless cycle of promises, kept or broken, swirling beneath the surface of mundane events. That evening, when the sky turned from molten gold to deep purple, Layla set up a small campfire outside a minor caravan station. She opened her journal beneath the star-strewn heavens, adding one last entry that recalled the calm on Neferet's face as she vanished into dust and starlight. She tried to capture in words the feeling of that final blessing, even though it lay just beyond language's grasp. One day she might read that passage, aloud to someone she trusted, hoping to pass on an inkling of the magnificent truth she had witnessed. For now, the desert's hush wrapped her in contemplation. She had learned through this expedition that destinies, like dunes, can shift unexpectedly, and that the devotion of a single soul could ripple across millennia. In a moment of reflection, she whispered a farewell to Neferet, offering gratitude for being chosen to help right the balance of an ancient vow. Then she gazed toward the horizon, where the last traces of daylight lingered. In that graceful twilight, Layla felt a sense of completion and, simultaneously, a stirring reminiscent of dawn. The desert wind carried away her soft prayer, and the hush enveloped them all, as silently as the shifting sands.